night itself, clearly it's unlikely that we're going to have, or it's likely that we're going to have significant numbers of votes not counted, and challenges all across the country in various states. Talk to us about your nightmare scenario and your best hope scenario.
The best hope scenario, I'll start with that one because I'm trying to be in a glass half full mind state these days, even though it's hard. The best case scenario is that we know who wins the election on election night or shortly thereafter, that it's an overwhelming margin of victory and that there's not as many disputes as we would have expected, and that most people were able to cast a ballot or were motivated to overcome these barriers, that massive turnout was able to beat massive suppression. That's my best case scenario. My nightmare scenario is that it's very close, that it takes a very long time to be decided, that Donald Trump prematurely declares victory, even though he doesn't have the power to do that, but the perception will be that he's going to try to do that he's going to litigate every aspect of this if it's close in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and that the reason he's trying to rush Amy Coney Barrett on the court right before the election is so that she will be a sixth justice to hear any sort of dispute, which is a fundamental conflict of interest. He is nominating someone that could then rule on his behalf. And he clearly thinks he needs 6 justices on the court because he can't trust John Roberts as a 5th conservative vote, even though John Roberts gutted the Voting Rights Act and did all of these other things that have benefited Republican interests. So the Republican Party is desperate right now. Voter suppression is their main strategy. And the way they want to carry out voter suppression is by packing the courts, in particular the Supreme Court, so they uphold that suppression and install Donald Trump for a second term. That is my nightmare scenario. I hope it doesn't happen, but that's clearly what they're trying to pull off.
And do you think Amy Coney Barrett, if she were to be confirmed, should recuse herself if it came to the 2020 election being thrown into the Supreme Court?
Yeah, she absolutely should recuse herself because people are already voting as she's being nominated. We're 21 days from November 3rd, but over 10 million people have already voted. By the time her hearing happens, many, many millions of people will have voted. And President Trump has explicitly said that he wants the Supreme Court to look at the ballots. So everything about Amy Coney Barrett's nomination is illegitimate, but it's especially illegitimate if Trump wants to get her on there so that he can install himself in a second term. And she should say, I understand there's a lot of concern about my nomination, about the appearance of my nomination, about the timing of my nomination. And to put some of those doubts to rest, I am going to recuse myself from any post-election dispute.
Programming is supported by Community Action Partnership of Ramsey and Washington's Head Start and Early Head Start, offering full day, part day, and year-round options for preschoolers and weekly home visits for pregnant moms and children under 3. Head Start is now taking applications for the fall. Priority is given to families on public assistance, in foster care, experiencing homelessness, or living below the poverty line. More information on a multilingual hotline at 651-603-5977 or at caprw.org.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. What a wonderful program, Democracy Now! I mean, it just emphasizes the intensity of the moment, the seismic nature of the next several weeks as we have to contend with the likelihood, the possibility of the Supreme Court being stacked, the likelihood that there will be efforts by our incumbent president, Donald Trump, to steal the election and to have a court set up to validate the theft, and the likelihood that if things progress in that fashion, we've got a long, hard row ahead of us. I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. I want to begin by connecting with State Senator Bobby Champion, and in a moment we'll be joined by State Senator Jeff Hayden. But Bobby Champion, first of all, thank you for being here. And I can't pass up the opportunity to ask a lawyer, the people's lawyer, to comment on what we were just listening to as we were standing by, listening to Amy Goodman's show about the Supreme Court. What are your impressions, and how are you and lawyers in your circle analyzing, discussing what's happening with the Senate effort to rush through the confirmation of Judge Amy Barrett?
Well, Al, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the question. Needless to say, we are looking and living in unprecedented times. This has been the first time in history that we have a sitting president and the Senate moving through an expedited process to get someone on the Supreme Court. And what we're also looking at, unfortunately, is the hypocrisy of it, right? Because these same individuals, be it Senator Lindsey Graham and others who indicated before that, that a president in their last year should not be able to nominate, and therefore the Senate confirm a Supreme Court justice. All that's out the door. What also concerns the legal community is having enough time to truly vet the person. When you think in terms of vetting a person and rushing through a process, there's likely things that you're going to forget. And there are things that's not going to get scrutinized. And so from that vantage point, there's concern. Then there's concern about whether the issues that will come to the Supreme Court will be fully looked upon based on legal precedent, or things that the court has considered settled law in the past, and whether now the justices will be more ideological as opposed to legal. And so it just makes everyone a little uncomfortable because, when you think in terms of our country, we're about consistency and building and evolving and looking at ways to unite us, not divide us. And so unfortunately, we are in the midst of a rush process to rush someone through who many believe may be the deciding vote on some of the most critical issues, from the Affordable Care Act, that is important, to some of the other issues around choice, Roe v. Wade. These are critical issues. And so we want to make sure that we think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is no longer with us, and we should select someone during a process who's in that spirit. And so, and last but certainly not least, the people should be able to vote, right? We are in the midst of an election, and we are looking to, hopefully from my vantage point, replace, the current incumbent, because I don't believe that person has done a good job of leading our nation in some of the most critical issues that I'm sure that you'll eventually ask me or Jeff about. So I'm hoping that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris becomes our next president and vice president. I believe their leadership would be important to lead us through this pandemic, deal with some of the issues around criminal justice reform and education and the economy. And I think that there's some other principles that we should hold up as well. So we're all concerned about it. You heard that program before. It was great.
Do you think, Senator Champion, that the Republicans would have the audacity to submit a contested election, say that Donald Trump contests, to a Supreme Court with the expectation that the court would support their remaining in power?
Absolutely.
Is that real?
That's real. That's real to me. That's real. Think about it. We heard Lindsey Graham, although I used this earlier, but I really want to just show you the flavor and what folks will do to justify their actions. Lindsey Graham was on tape saying, mark my words, we should never let A, B, C, D, F, G happen. And the very thing happens, and he's totally flipped the script and justified his behavior. And so they've been stacking the court for quite some time, which is why I thought it was very important for us to elect the right person in 2016, which would have been Hillary Clinton. I really believe that there would have been a much more thoughtful process in order to have jurists, or justices, whether in the federal court and on, who federal district court and all up the ladder to, the appellate court, those who are balanced and thoughtful and would see themselves removed from the politics and would just concentrate on what's in the best interest of our country from a legal perspective. So I do believe that they will. Think about this. You also have had the president and others who have gone about saying they're going to have different people at the polls and challenging things. He's been very clear around providing misinformation and setting up all these things. And we have not heard very many Republicans stand up against some of the things that philosophically run contrary to our democracy. And so I just don't think that they would change the stripes. And I really do believe that it's possible. And we saw it happen in Florida, with Gore.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the climate we're in, Senator Champion? I fear that it's becoming more and more hostile. I fear that the radical right is becoming more and more emboldened, and that the president's messages to groups like some kind of boys, whatever it was, that he is calling white nationalists to arms, and that the white nationalists, this is what I think, are itching for a fight. They're on a doomsday mission, and they have just been waiting and waiting and arming and waiting for the deal to go down. In fact, they want to precipitate the deal, which is why they showed up in our communities and others around the country post George Floyd with all the carnage and fire and looting, precipitating that, not that they wanted to loot, but they wanted to create confusion and chaos and have that all be laid at the feet of Black people or lawless communities, and they were the ones doing the law breaking, instigating. So I fear that we're moving towards something that the white nationalists yearn for and want. What do we do? Am I off base in that fear, number one? And if I'm not, what do we do about it?
Well, one, I don't think you're off base. What I would say is that we've been on this road for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, the fears have been stoked and promoted and by our president. You may say, what makes you say that? Well, go back to when Barack Obama was our elected president and was on his way to becoming our elected president. And Trump started the birther movement, right? And when you think in terms of the birther movement, then you build that on all the other derogatory things that he's been doing in order to separate us. We're talking about race, and race is an important part of that. And we will not, and we have a Justice Department that won't call them domestic terrorists. But we have a Justice Department that would only look from a political perspective to decide who they're going to, talk strangely about. And so it is about being a divider in chief when we think in terms of this president and the things that they've done. Now, let me give you a really basic example, but one that I think means a lot more than what people are willing to consider. The mask. His unwillingness to wear a mask is really more symbolic of so many other things than what I think we really think about. Let me ask you to consider this. Number one, wearing a mask is not necessarily for me, it is for you.
Mm-hmm.
And because I am connected to you, I should want to make sure I'm doing everything from a communal perspective, not from an individual perspective. And so when people don't want to wear masks and they've been promoting not wanting to wear masks, it is because they want their individual selfish perspective to be elevated above what we all should do, right? So he defies that. He constantly says that he's not going to wear a mask, which means he doesn't care about us. and he politicized wearing a mask. He doesn't listen to science. He finds ways to divide scientists who don't necessarily agree with him. He finds ways to promote his perspective that is more political. And I think that goes all the way down to race. And he was in the last debate and would not openly reject white supremacy. Now, the only time he ever remotely asked anyone a question was when he says, "What do you want me to say?" Well, you know, that was really rhetorical, right? It's because he was just trying to stall and find a way not to be required to say it because he did not want to do it. That goes back to Charlottesville. It just goes on and on and on. When Barack Obama was president, we had an increase in hate groups. This is well documented. So now you have someone who does a whistleblowing because he talks their language and he talks to them and he promotes conspiracy theorists. He promotes he promotes individualism as opposed to a communal approach for us to be truly unified. And so I do think it's a problem. And I think that we need to recognize it, speak to it, not ignore it, and even use the mask as an example, because this is a movement that says I versus you. And as long as I'm okay, I don't care anything about you. And guess what? When you think in terms of people who have suffered greatly from COVID-19, we have over 215,000 people who have died. And who disproportionately are impacted by COVID-19 than people of color. That's well documented, right? And so if you don't want to wear a mask and you don't want to be your brother's keeper, when we should be our brother's keeper. And so that's why Biden and Harris are so important, because you got Joe Biden who says, you know what, I care about you enough that I'm going to wear a mask because I do not want to put you at risk. And all of his policies flow from that sort of thinking, that I'm thinking about you. How do I better your life, your family's money? How do I put livable wage money on the table? How do I make sure I bring back manufacturing opportunities or opportunities for entrepreneurship or ingenuity to be elevated here in our wonderful country? How do I make sure I help you? That's all consistent with the policy and the perspective of why it's important to wear a mask, because that symbolically is what it means. You versus just me.
Bobby, let me ask, you got to leave in about 2 minutes for your next meeting, but before you leave, let me have you introduce our next friend and colleague. I called you and Jeff Hayden, Senator Hayden, the dynamic duo. You guys have been partners, battlefield warriors on behalf of our people for a number of years, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Well, Jeff's going to be leaving the Senate in a few days, and you did something, you and community members joined together this past Saturday just to give him some props and throw him some love. So take a minute to say what was accomplished, I think, in the wonderful event at Sabathani on Saturday. And we'll just use that to bring Senator Hayden in.
Well, you know, Senator Hayden is not just a legend in his own mind. He really is a legend, right? He is a person who has fought tirelessly for all communities, but specifically also the African American community and other communities of color. So what happened on Saturday was a mere attempt, is the word I'm looking for, to celebrate him as he closes this chapter, but continue on. We made it very clear that it wasn't a funeral, it wasn't a retirement. It is closing one chapter, but going on because he has made a commitment that he's going to always remain and be with us. But Senator Hayden was also being celebrated from his family, from other colleagues, because of his great and vast knowledge around, let's say, healthcare, for an example. He was our healthcare guru when the others were no longer with us, from former Senator Tony Lowry or Linda Berglund or some of the others. He being Jeff, stepped right in, or Senator Hayden stepped right into that role and began to lead us around those critical issues of health. And we're going through a pandemic. So he's been our clarion voice in order to talk about what needs to happen from a policy perspective that protects all of us. Secondly, he's always had his eye on people and young people. I gave an example the other day about this pool, Phillips Pool. Everywhere we would go, he would find a way to bring the conversation back to the need for a pool in Phillips community. He said the young Somalis and others were drowning, and I don't care where we were. We were over one time in North Minneapolis talking about the tornado, but somehow he made the conversation come back not only to what North Minneapolis needed, but that Phillips pool. And we eventually got that Phillips pool done because he was just diligent and tenacious around that. But he's also the person who led the efforts around minimum wage, the first effort when we think in terms of the state. He also led the effort and was the chief author of removing racial restrictive covenants out of our property records. He was also the co-chairperson when he and I did equity funding that has now landed more than $100 million into our communities all across the state of Minnesota that helped all communities, not just the African-American community. I can go on because his record is so vast. The only downside about Saturday is that we didn't have merely enough time to really lift up everything that he did, but we did a really good job with community and community showing up to celebrate this clarion voice, this person who really feels and believes in us all, and us as Minnesotans who really believe in one Minnesota. Even before coming to the legislature, he was helping the homeless. He worked at the Heart Connection. He worked in City Hall with Gary Schiff as a policy aide. His record and his capacity is unmatched. And so with that being said, you are all going to have the benefit of hearing the thoughts and ideas and the perspective of my good friend and brother, Senator Jeff Hayden.
There we go. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, Jeff. How you doing, man? Senator Hayden, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Alvin, Jan. Hey, Sherilyn, good to see you.
Hey.
I am happy, and thanks for Bobby Joe. He is, as you know, Al, he's been, my partner for a long time, our partner, our friend, and he's going to continue to do phenomenal work in the legislature, and hopefully I'll land in the capacity that will be able to continue to help him do that work just from a little different perspective, which hopefully, we often, the advocate and lobbying and activist community is really important to the legislative process as well. Not sure I'm going to turn into an activist, but you never know. But I certainly want to be an advocate or figure out how I can help the legislative process, especially continuing to look at communities that don't have, the access that maybe other bigger organizations do. So I'm looking forward to that. I got to pay some bills around here, so I got to find a job. But I'm really happy and really thankful to be in a position to be the second African American senator in this state's history, and to work with people like Bobby Joe and Representative Moran and Representative Richardson and others, and be preceded by Representative Neva Walker, who was the first African American woman. I'm just, Representative Ellison and Congressman, now Attorney General. I'm just really, really fortunate and full. My soul's really full to have that opportunity.
Let's go back and sort of recount your career. I think it'd be instructive. Bob mentioned that you were a legislative aide to Councilmember Schiff before you went for election to the city council. But where did you start? How did you get involved? Where'd the bug come from to get you involved in politics? And what was the progression of your political career?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. My family, my mother's side of the family, was born and raised here. My grandfather, Willard John Merrill, was a senior pastor at Bethesda Baptist Church, and he bought a house in South Minneapolis about 1918, as far as I can see. So that's the Merrill side has been here well over 100 years. Many of you guys know my Aunt Adrian. So a lot of people know my mother, though she's resided in California for many years. My Aunt Mary Merrill, of course, the park board superintendent emeritus, is one of my aunts. Anika Robbins is my cousin, right? So there's a lot of us around here. And then most people, especially who watch the show, would know Peter Hayden, the president of Turning Point, and he started that in 1976. So I say that to say, not to brag on him because I do, but that service was always in my blood and my DNA. I'll tell a story that I don't tell often. Sometimes I forget about it because I was pretty young. I must have been about 8 or 10 years old growing up here in Minneapolis. And I don't know if you guys were here, but the Aquatennial Parade was kind of a really big deal. You know, it's kind of tapered off here, but this was when it was the biggest thing going in Minneapolis every summer. And in the parade, they would only usually have 1 or 2 Black organizations, Drummer Bugle Corps, Sabathanites, the Elks. So I think it was the Elks at that time. And they would always have them last, right? And so they never kind of got their just due. As a matter of fact, my dad tells a story, and I think Spike and others tell the story, that they invented something called the snake. And that was, and it became their kind of signature move. But what it was really about was getting out of the way of the horses' excrement because they were the last one, right? I don't know if you remember that, Al. So they created something that looked like it was really, but what it really was to dodge the stuff because we were always the last one to go. And so one year, you know, after a lot of stuff, I know Brother Spike and others, my father said, forget it. We're going to boycott the Aquatennial Parade. And for a while there, we had our festival over at Phyllis Wheatley, and we did our own summer celebration and brought people from all over the country to participate. But that very year, they had made a concession, and they got like the Commodores, which were the ambassadors. And then they had the Junior Commodores, which were the junior ambassadors. And that year, myself and another young lady, I don't remember her name, we were going to be the junior ambassadors. And so because the community had made a decision that they weren't going to participate, of course, my mother and my father decided that I couldn't participate. And, you know, this is a big deal. You get to go around the state, you get all this stuff, and you get recognized. And though it wasn't the decision I made, it was the decision my parents made. But I look upon that time, 8, 9, 10 years old, and that was really important to understanding what Bobby Joe had just talked about, Senator Champion, about community and being in community space and not looking at the individualism of it all. Because if that was the case, if I'm not mistaken, the young lady that was also chosen, and I don't know her name, so I can't embarrass her, her parents made a different decision and she went on. And, you know, these things, you know, everybody has to make their decision, but when you work with community, so it really started there. But where I really got going is we moved to California, moved to San Francisco with my mother. I ended up coming back in 1995. My best friend, Brian Thomas, was killed at the Riverview Theater in that 95 year that they called it Murderapolis. Luckily, well, unluckily for him, he passed away, but the killer, the whole thing was witnessed by an off-duty police officer who was coming to the Riverview to patronize it, and person was apprehended and caught and sent to prison. But I decided to stay at that point. I was had gotten laid off from the work that I was in California. They had shifted and reorganized, and started to. And my dad, you know, I lived out there with him for a while. And as I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I asked my aunt, who was the associate superintendent, what could I do? It just didn't seem like the north side or the south side that I grew up in, that we rode our bikes until the street lights came on and that kind of stuff. And she sent me to Powderhorn Park to work with Corky Wiseman. And I started volunteering there. Then I ended up working for Hennepin County, that was in the neighborhood. So I really spent a lot of time working in the Powderhorn neighborhood with Corky, working directly with low-income people. I was the standard financial worker, the worker that people talk to when they're coming to get assistance from the government. And through that process, I met the neighborhood association folks. They invited me to a meeting. I ended up getting on their board. I'll rush this along. And that's where I met Gary Schiff. And he asked me when he got elected, would I come down to be his aide? He was a pretty young man. I shouldn't say he's not, but he's a pretty young man. And he was white and gay. And he'll tell you this, in a multicultural neighborhood. And so he wanted to make sure that he had community reflected. And that's when I went to work for Gary and saw the other side of government and how government worked. And then I went on from there, ran for city council, didn't make it through there. Then I ran in 2008 after Neva retired, spent 3 years in the House, and then the last 9 years in the Senate. So that's the progression. And it really focused in on health and human service, because that's really where I had been working. I worked on homeless issues, as Bobby said. a housing administrator. So I really understood that, and then built out my skills on the healthcare side, and then went into leadership. And then Bobby and I worked on economic development and et cetera.
Who did you run against for city council when you ran?
I ran against Elizabeth Glidden, and we went to a primary.
In eighth ward, right? Eighth ward.
Yep. Yeah. And she won by, well, the top two got in, and was 141 votes short. But the person who won had put out some deceptive material linking her with my aunt, who was running for the park board, Mary, at the time. Mm-hmm. We were able to kind of show that was deceptive. We took it to court. Though we didn't win it, it became clear to the people of the 8th Ward that she shouldn't be the council member, and that's how Elizabeth then went on to win. What's ironic about that, and why I think it's important to talk about it, is in the celebration that Bobby was the host of, Elizabeth was really the lead and key organizer. She was the first person to call me to want to do something in the community. And so I say that out loud because I think politics has gotten so incredibly divisive these days, and so polarizing, that I think Elizabeth's leadership to show, and our relationship grew over the years, and we work very closely together, that shows that, if you lose an election or you don't get what you want, you don't take the matters into your own hands. You get back at it. You refine your skills. You try it again. If you're really, truly about the community, you don't walk away bitter and throwing everybody under the bus. You simply, move forward and figure out another way to help the community. And Elizabeth and I just want to say that and shout her out loud, because she was a tireless advocate. She worked well in our community. And once again, she was the first person to reach out to want to do something in the community.
She followed then, who was it? Who was in that seat before her? Sharon? Was it Sharon?
Sharon had the seat. Brian Heron had the seat.
Brian had it, yeah.
And then Lilligren had the seat, and then it got redistricted. And then that's when we ran. Okay. So Robert Lilligren had it, but then he got redistricted to the 6th Ward. Right. But yeah, it was the seat that produced Sharon for 12 years and Brian for 8. And then Sharon ascended to be the mayor for another 8 years. But this community, this little small neighborhood, the Bryant neighborhood is one of the smallest neighborhoods in town, has produced a lot of Black politicians, or elected officials.
What's the status now? You're leaving the Senate. Who's on the bench over in that community right now? How does it look for the future in terms of Black representation? I know that you are being succeeded by a Somali gentleman, and I should know his name. I don't know his name, but pardon me for not having his name tip of tongue. But how does the process look now, presently, and going forward?
Yeah, so the person that defeated me, his name is Omar Fatah. I don't know him very well. I think he's been in town a few years, and this is a growing community. It was traditionally African American and white. Now it has a lot of Latino folks, Latinx folks, and a very growing East African community. And so, I think that's where a lot of the weight. And then there also is an increasing progressive community that I think we often see out that's protesting and are looking for this kind of radical change. So I wish them well. If there's anything I can do to be helpful to the community I live in and grew up in, so we'll see. I wish I could say more, but I just don't have that information. I am impressed though with we have some community leaders here that are running neighborhoods, people like Carmen Means and Alicia Smith, Tabitha, and I don't want to mess up her last name over at Potterhorn.
Tabitha Montgomery.
Montgomery.
Yep.
And so I feel like there is a ton of activism on 38th in Chicago, a lot of conversation. Councilmember Jenkins is still here, kind of leading, the charge from the city. County Commissioner Angela Conley has been pretty active. So there are a lot of, folks that are here that hopefully can continue to go. And then I'm not going anywhere. I'm just trying to figure out, I have a small consultant company called Hayden Strategies, LLC. And then also there may be some other opportunity that I have that I'm kind of going through the process to figure out where I land. So we're going to still do work, and we're going to be able to figure out and hopefully be a trusted advisor and a strategic consultant to the process, because certainly right now we're in need of some leadership. The George Floyd incident and COVID has really took its toll on our city, and certainly South Minneapolis is really right now reeling from those tragedies. Our homeless population is sprawling out of control. We got Lake Street to rebuild. We got to figure out what to do with 38th in Chicago. We got to continue with the law enforcement transformation and reform. A lot of that has to be driven at the state level. So we got a lot of work to do yet here, and I'm hopeful that I can continue to help in some capacity in moving that forward.
Let me ask you the same question I put to Senator Champion. When you look at what's going on at the national level, in a few minutes, I want to play a tape. I did an interview a little bit ago with a legislator. Her name is Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. She represents Delaware in the U.S. House of Representatives, and she reached out to me. I reached out to her, looking to get somebody to talk about the presidential campaign of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and so she was on in that capacity. But looking at the whole thing, I wonder how it looks to you in the next few days. We've got a couple of weeks before, 3 weeks, the world may change. Right. The world needs to change, but it could easily change for the worse. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the polling data looks like Vice President Biden and Senator Harris have a good lead in the nation and in Minnesota. But as we know, the way that our nation is set up, it comes down to about 8 states that are usually swing states. And that's where the Electoral College will go. So, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota was in play. I think it's moving out of play. It looks like it's coming our way. Florida, Georgia may have something to say about it. So there are Arizona now looks like it is in play. Gabby Giffords' husband is up for U.S. Senator, and he's doing well, a former astronaut. So I think that we're on the right path. We not only need to get to win that, but we need to flip the Senate, not only locally, but we need to flip it nationally. And that way we can get some things done. Because even in Obama's second term, he didn't have the Senate, and Mitch McConnell vowed not to do what's right for the country, but to stop anything that President Obama had to do. So the way that works is we really need to push out and win those states. And then I think we can put together the CDC. We can participate again in the World Health Organization. We can move forward. There's just been so many things behind the scenes that the Trump administration has gutted for the interest of big business, that we can put these things back together. And then I think that the big thing that both Senator Harris and Vice President Biden have to do if the effect that they win is they got to pay attention to the African American community. Just flat out, when James Clyburn said we trust Joe and South Carolina failed and went to Joe Biden, the rest of the East and the South went to Joe Biden. That's how he got the nomination. He literally owes his nomination and being in this position to African American people. And I say that not to spite any other groups of people. We want everybody to vote. But often in this situation, and I'm kind of moving away from the POCI conversation, because though I respect all of my colleagues, and I've represented people of color throughout this district really well. But I think that if we put it together collectively, often we homogenize it, and then often African Americans people's issues drop to the bottom. So I think that it is imperative our Indigenous brothers and sisters, Latinx, our East African brothers and sisters, and African immigrants all are at the table, and we're fighting the same way. But I think that African Americans really need to make sure that they carve out and get what's rightfully theirs. They're the ones that are going to put them there. And the brunt of all of these things, community-based violence, law enforcement reform, healthcare access, all of those things are what really lands at us. And I don't think that we get in return what we've given. So I'm really hopeful that those that Kamala or Senator Harris and Vice President Biden really lay out an agenda and isn't skittish or afraid to articulate what's good for African American people.
check out this brief interview. It's about 8 minutes with Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, again, who represents Delaware. And then Shirley and LaChapelle, wanted you to thank you for being here and hang out with me. It's so important that you're here for a number of reasons, among which is the fact that you are a candidate for city council in the Maple Grove community. Am I saying that right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's critical that you bring a voice of both experience, knowledge, leadership. You're an organizer, you're political, plus you're in the health profession, plus you've been in the economic equation because you've been in the wealth building arena as a realtor. And I wanted Jeff to talk to you about strategies or tips as you pursue your first, to my knowledge, elected position. But I wanted both of you to respond to Sister Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. I'm going to play this real quickly, and then let's get some feedback from you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane, and we're going to listen to the interview I did this morning, a couple hours ago, with Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, who represents Delaware in the U.S. House of Representatives. She's a Biden-Harris surrogate and called me in that capacity. Here's the interview. Pleased to have as a guest today, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. She represents Delaware in the U.S. House of Representatives, and she serves as the Assistant Whip for House Leadership. She sits on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and she works in a committee that has broad jurisdiction over healthcare, the environment, commerce and trade, energy policy, telecommunications, manufacturing, and consumer protection. She's joined me today to talk about her support for the Biden-Harris ticket and to talk about why it's important that we all vote. Congresswoman, good morning and thank you. Good afternoon. We broadcast this. Thank you for being here. And you have to unmute your microphone.
Hello, Al. Thank you so much for having me, and so good to be with you and the people of Minnesota. Just proud to be here. Thank you. And your reputation precedes you, so I'm honored to be on your show.
Well, that's amazing, but thank you so much. Gracious of you. Listen, you've got a short amount of time. I want to get to the things that really, really matter, and that is the election. We are running headlong into the greatest decision our people and maybe the world will face in the next several days. What's your take? Where are we, and what message are you bringing to voters and Americans all over the country?
Well, first of all, thank you. And you're right, I wear different hats. I am a national co-chair for the Biden-Harris campaign, as well as I got a chance to serve as one of the 4 co-chairs on the VP selection committee that helped Joe Biden pick Kamala Harris in that historic pick for vice president. And I can tell you, I don't think I need to tell anybody, we know how high the stakes are in this election. And we know that there is a big difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I've known Joe Biden for over 30 years here in Delaware as our senator and as our vice president. And what he presents in terms of the credibility, the confidence, the experience, that's already known. But what he said when he decided to run was that this was about the soul of this country, about the soul of America. That was pre-COVID. That was pre-George Floyd's passing, murder. Now more than ever, when he decided to do that run, I remember talking to him, it was after Charlottesville, and knowing that we had a president who really doesn't care about us. He'll use us, but he doesn't care about us. And so when you look at the agenda that Biden and Harris have moving forward, I think it touches on the things that all of us care about. Jobs. I mean, you know, when I talk, a lot of people who don't vote, and especially I saw a survey that was done on Black folks, and we said one of the challenges is many times we vote, but we don't see the connection between our vote and what happens on the ground. And that's why a lot of people don't even want to vote. But I'm going to tell you, there is a real connection. Jobs, access to capital to start your own business. Joe Biden has that plan. college affordability. He has a plan to invest in our HBCUs and our minority serving institutions. Even looking at the issues of criminal justice and social justice.
Mm-hmm. He has an actual plan for these things and is ready to start on day one. But then you look at our president, and I just asked the question. I actually do this thing now. I call it shaking my head. Are we safer since this man came in? No. Are we more united as a country? No. And are we healthier physically and financially? No. I'm just shaking my head. If we don't vote and turn out like we never have before, then shaking our head on us, because this is our moment. This is our opportunity to transform this country and to deal with the deep-seated issues of structural and institutional racism as well. Now's the time.
Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester, in the last few minutes that we have, I know you've got a tight schedule today. Thank you again for taking time, but I want you to address the COVID-19, the impact of that, and our inability of the president and the White House to seriously address what Americans need to do to protect ourselves, and how do we rebuild our economy? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the fact that he doesn't follow the science, again, a big difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden listens to the science and understands that in order for us to get our health and well-being, because we know that Black and brown people were disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. We're dying more. We are at risk when we go to work more, and our financial stability is more harmed. And so Joe Biden understands the first thing we have to do is get this pandemic under control. The president, I actually was in the room where it happened, where the debate was, where with the president and vice president. He didn't even care to be tested to make sure that he was healthy and just spread the germs, because it's about him and not about us. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason why I can't stay on the call long is because I'm about to be on a call with the Democratic leadership to talk about a COVID-19 relief package, so that we can make sure that people have the stimulus checks and that they have the unemployment and that they have the childcare and things that we need to move us forward. I would just say there is a website. If Michelle Obama said, make sure you pack a lunch, a dinner, wear your comfy shoes, whatever you have to do, there are many options to vote. Make a plan that works for you. Go to iwillvote.com/MN. Know what your options are. Think about what works best for you, what is safest. You have a plan A and B, and make sure everybody like, don't just say, do you have a plan? Show me your plan. My biggest message for all of us, whether you are young, whether you are a Black man, because we need our Black men. We need you. My biggest message is, let us not be bamboozled. We're gonna vote. We're going to vote like we've never voted in our lives. And I am hopeful. I continue to have hope, because I'm a person of faith. And I believe it says, Lamentations says, this I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. It's because of our mercy, God's mercy, that we're not consumed. Great is his faithfulness. So we got to do our part. That's right. That's my message. iwillvote.com/MN. Make your plan. See what your family's plan is, and vote. Vote. In that spirit, my wife, Bobby, and I just voted half an hour ago. And so we voted for the Biden-Harris ticket. We are hopeful and committed to making a difference and a change in our country. Lisa Rochester, thank you so much. Thank you for your service, your leadership. Let's come back again in the future, because I want to talk about your experience when you were here at the George Floyd event here in Minnesota. That'll be our next conversation. Thank you so much. Love you. Thank you, Minnesota, and vote. Take care.
Right. Yeah. Well, isn't that inspiring? That was an inspiring conversation. Sherlyn, what do you think? What do you think about that? And
my God, she said it all. The only thing I want to add is, when she said vote as if your very life depends upon it, because guess what? It does.
Absolutely true. Jeff, what are your thoughts? Yeah, I thought that was a great, almost sermonette from her. The passion and the power and the clarity, but the challenge to each of us to pay attention to our interests and do what we have to do in our own interests. What do you think, Jeff Hayden?
Yeah, no, I agree. The Congresswoman was inspiring, and it just tells you like the talent that we have in this country with our people. And I think that she articulated it with real clarity, and I think that she also spelled out why it is important for us to vote for the vice president and for Senator Harris. And that they actually have a plan, that they believe in science, that they understand the issue. You know, that Joe understands what it is that he needs to do in our communities. He worked for the president. Senator Harris understands. I am, fortunate that, I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, went to high school and college there. My mother still lives there, and the church that Senator Harris belongs to is the church that I grew up in, and that my mother still is there. And so that she comes from the lineage of Willie Brown and Reverend Amos C. Brown, who's the pastor emeritus at Third Baptist Church in San Francisco, and London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, goes there. And so I give a little shout out to my adopted hometown. But she does understand these issues. She grew up in Oakland, California. She was born at Kaiser Hospital, right in the heart of Oakland. And her being a attorney general, a prosecutor, and a U.S. Senator is important. And I want people to, I don't think people get this as much because the criminal justice system hasn't served us well. Well, one of the reasons why the criminal justice system has served us well is we've with laws, obviously, that didn't work for us, but we also have prosecutors, judges, and attorney generals who didn't understand us and went for the most time that they could give us, right? Prosecuted us beyond what it is. And so let's be clear, as I had this conversation with my brother Al the other day, Al Flowers, about why it's important that we have Black prosecutors, Black judges, right? Think about Judge Alexander, Judge Bransford, the Judge Poston, Judge Lane, Judge Brown right now, right? We want, there's a case that I know of that I won't talk a lot about that's in front of Judge Brown now around custody and child protection. Well, I know that Judge Brown is Michael Brown's going to do the right thing and not disproportionately take our children out of the house like other judges have done. So that's an important thing. That's not a bad deal. That's a good deal because often the situation that our communities are in makes us make some decisions that we wish that we regret, but we would hope that if we get in front of a judge that they'll show us some mercy and compassion and give us a sentence that's commensurate to the things that we did, but put us on the way and not send us to jail for the rest of our life for a disproportionate amount of time. That's important. That matters. And so I really feel fortunate, and I'm glad to see the Congresswoman really being clear and articulate and inspiring in terms of what we need to do and why we need to vote.
In the spirit of all politics being local, Senator Hayden, what do we do to support candidates like Sherilyn M. LaChapelle, who's on the call with us today, running for city council for the city of Maple Grove? And I'm so happy that she's running number one, but I'm thinking we need to figure out how we get a bench, a field, 4 or 5 people deep for every possible seat that we should run for. What advice do you have for Sherilyn, number one? But what instruction do you have for the community so that we can support and ensure her success in her pursuit of the seat on city council in a suburban community? Trump has talked to the suburbs, but surprise, we're in the suburbs too. Okay, and we are emerging as leaders in the suburbs. What advice to Sherilyn? Talk to her on the radio if you would.
Well, let me say this, Sherilyn, she usually gives me advice. And by the way, Sherilyn, I'm watching my blood pressure, taking my medicine, and I'm dropping a little weight because that's usually what she kind of tells me about to make sure that I'm healthy. So I'm doing what she's told me to do.
Yes. We had something happen. There, it's coming back. There we go. Kevin's here. There we are, coming back.
All right, coming on back. I was just on there.
Yesterday for 2 hours, a Comcast outage all across the country.
Is that right?
I'm wondering,
Yeah.
did it happen again?
Yeah. It seems to get a little strange that we doing this stuff and it's going down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would be suspect of something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 911 was down last week for a while, nationwide.
Yeah, nationwide, because I went on to see how far it was, and it just lit up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we can blame you, Calvin, and not Comcast. Okay. I'm joking.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Jeff, you there?
The host. Oh yeah, I can.
Hey, Jeff.
The video. It says the host to stop the video, but I guess I can just talk to you through the screen.
Yeah, and I think we're off the air now, but I think we can still talk live. Kelvin, can we go to live internet? So I think we're having a good conversation. We can still promote this. Kelvin?
We have lost Kelvin.
Yeah, he's on. I see him there. I don't know. He said his computer kicked him off. He runs the program. So the problem is he doesn't know what happened. Neither do I. But I'm sorry. And hopefully somebody was in the studio at the station, because somebody had to pick it up, because otherwise it's dead air. Yeah. And generally, Jackie Maddox is there. So we're streaming live again. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. A ghost in the internet got to us a few minutes ago, and we were in the last 5 minutes of the live broadcast on KFAI. And we were at a point where Senator Jeff Hayden was talking both to me and to you in the audience on Facebook and YouTube, and also to the audience listening on the Conversations with Al McFarlane show on KFAI, talking to us and to Cherlynn M. LaChapelle. I asked him to address her as a candidate for the City Council of Maple Grove. Cherlynn is a known political expert, a mover and a shaker, and has been involved in grassroots organizing for our community, particularly for professionals in the health industry, for Black women. She's been involved in real estate. And I'm, for one, so glad that she's also decided to toss her ring into the electoral politics arena, looking for the office of city council member in Maple Grove. So Jeff, take a few minutes and go ahead, and we'll circulate this again to our networks. Unfortunately, we're missing the last 4 or 5 minutes of this for the radio broadcast, but go ahead. And thank you.
Well, thanks, Alan. I'll be brief. I think what I was going to say is that, Cheryl Lim / Pell has been a leader in this community for a long time in multi-sectors. She's clearly a clear voice for the work that needs to be done. All politics are local. The local city councils, as you can see, have a lot of power in these communities, but it also helps us to get the votes out so that we can continue to move the legislature. It's time to flip the Minnesota Senate. Warren Limmer has been there too long, in my estimation. It is time to get that from Maple Grove that represents Maple Grove. It's a wonderful community. I can just tell you, I got a ton of bills that are really good bills for people, child protection, and others that I can't even get Senator Limmer to hear. So not to divert to his race, but to say that we need people like Cheryl Lynn, we need people like Kelsey Dawson, who I know is on the school board out in that area. You talk about a bench. We are starting to see people kind of rise up. The other thing I'll say quickly to make sure Cheryl Lynn gets the last say is we need to have more people who work inside of government, more staffers, more government relations people, more researchers, more lawyers, more people on boards and commissions. That then helps to generate and guide. It certainly has helped to guide me. A quick shout out to Kareem Murphy, who's the government relations chief at Hennepin County, and now Fatima Moore, who is now the chief lobbyist or the government relations chair or director at the city of Minneapolis. Those things are really important. I might have had a little bit to do to help get them in the door, but they are helping to guide and talk to community and guide the people in governance to say what are the best practices, and to do that from a perspective that's not only professional good, but also from their lived experiences. And that's what Cheryl Lynn will bring to the table. That's what Kelsey is out there is bringing to the table, and others. My good friend Sherry Pugh is on the Mound City Council, and others. And so it warms my heart to start to see us be able to rise up and get on those local commissions and boards in those suburban communities, because many of us live there. As a matter of fact, we have a declining African-American population in South Minneapolis, and most of that is due to people moving in the suburbs, which I applaud. I'm not one to say people should live where they want to live, where they feel comfortable, what fits their lifestyle, but I love the idea that we're getting more civically involved and engaged in those communities.
And by the way, Sherry's running for mayor in Mound. She's on the city council, but my sister is running for mayor, and she will be an excellent mayor.
That's phenomenal.
So Sherilyn, talk about why you chose to run. What made you make the decision to toss the hat in the ring? And thank you for hanging out with us today. And I want to also, before you're going to be the last speaker, but also talk about what we're working on together to help create awareness about crisis intervention in the COVID-19, working with Dr. Akinsanya. Let's talk about that as well. But first about politics, impressions on what the representative said, then your decision and where we are from your point of view.
Well, my decision came about because I'm always saying how things should be. You all who know me know I'm always saying what should happen. And Sherry, and I'm going to say some of my white neighbors, when I'd be sitting on the bar having a sandwich in the various restaurants, you strike up a conversation, and then we start talking, and they say, wow, you're really frank. I like your ideas. You should run for office. I'd vote for you. And this has been going on. So finally this year I said, I think I will. I think with all this toxic environment, it's time for a little love and a little compassion, things that nurses bring to the fold. Also, my lived experience. I have been around a few years, and I think I have a good idea how to help people. That's what I do. And I want to be a part of the future of Maple Grove. I want other people that look like me and look like others of color to be a part of building that future in this beautiful city. The city should look like those who live here. We're not just one-dimensional, we're multi-dimensional and multi-ethnic. Now, as far as COVID, what was your other question now?
Oh, that's a good. What was your impression and reaction to the comments from Representative from Delaware, Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester?
I totally agree with her. You know, Joe Biden's what we need as a president, and Kamala, oh my God, she's going to take no prisoners as far as backing him up and getting things done. And for those of us in the Black community who are sitting back and saying, well, I don't like her, she was a prosecutor. I don't like her, she was this. She was doing her job. She was doing what she was elected to do and what she was paid to do. And oftentimes, doing our jobs may make us not be in the position that everybody will be happy with. But because she was there, oftentimes things went a little easier on us than they would have had someone else been in that position. So it's time for us to stop hating on one another because somebody's moving up the ladder. It's time for some support and backup because we have nothing and no one to blame but ourselves if this person called Donald Trump and his crew get reelected again. Life can't get any worse, but if they get in again, trust me, it will get worse. This COVID thing, I'm going to use that to segue into that. What kind of leader who has the foreknowledge how dangerous a virus, a disease is, and after knowing the history of what the Spanish flu did in 1918, would not do preventative measures, would not educate the country, would not try to make sure and ensure that there were enough supplies to get us through. You know, this blame game on President Obama, that's ridiculous. That's a child's game. COVID-19 is a killer. The things it does to the body, we don't even know. It's a monster we've never seen before. It may do one thing with one person and something entirely different with everybody else. But the other thing, you can feel great and then it can bounce back.